Hello and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Universe Podcast. Today we are back to the Clone Wars, talking about Season 2, Episodes 9, 10, and 11. We're talking about General Grievous and why does he hate the Jedi quite so much. We're talking about clones and how do they fit when they don't fit as part of the war. We're talking about losing lightsabers and journeying through the dark underside of the actually pretty gentle criminal underbelly of Coruscant. All that and more after this commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. This is Matthew, your host. I'm joined as always for the Clone Wars discussions by Riki and Sarah Hayashi. Riki and Sarah, hello. How are we doing today?
Hello. As best as we can manage.
Yeah, I think that's fair. For those who are perhaps listening to this a little later than it comes out, we're recording this today on June 7th. We are still right in the middle of the events that are taking place after the murder of George Floyd by the police and the protests and the violence and all of that. And on my other podcast, Superhero Ethics, we actually did a whole episode on how do we as fans and how do we as content creators respond to moments like this, and how do the stories that we care about so much shape our thoughts on this. And I talked a lot about my feelings about Star Wars and these stories and how they've really helped me understand, you know, the importance of resistance and rebellion, and also the importance of, you know, the Jedi concept of, you know, that hating what you fear can turn you into what you fear, and that moments like this can show us that maybe that's not always the case, and just kind of how all that troubles. And so we're not going to go too deep into all of that today. But I did want us to all I think we all wanted to just kind of take a moment to sort of say where we stand, and I think where this podcast itself stands. And I want to hear kind of for both of you, how has this moment been and where you are. But I know for me, you know, I believe in justice, and I believe in fighting for justice because of what I learned in part from Star Wars, one of my first moral teachers. And I'm very much believe in Black Lives Matter. I very much believe in, you know, ending police violence, and I'm troubled by how a lot of it is being covered, but I'm somewhat hopeful about the direction things are going in terms of the cops being arrested and more police departments really looking at systemic reform, and knowing that there's obviously a long way to go. But I think for me as a Star Wars fan and just as a person, I know very much where I stand right now with Black Lives Matter. How are you all feeling about where we are today?
So for me, Star Wars, well, any science fiction, you know, fantasy story is partly about escaping, you know, our reality into a different one. But it's also about allegory, about telling tales that relate back to the real world. And for me, Star Wars, you know, as a kid was just cool, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, Darth Vader, Stormtroopers, the Death Star, those were the cool things when you're a kid. But as you grow up, you come to understand, like, these things have historical parallels, right? Like, Stormtroopers literally was what they called Nazi Germany's, you know, secret police. And there are other parallels, like in how now the Empire was created in the Clone Wars cartoon and the prequel movies, of using a conflict to militarize a previously peaceful republic,
right?
And forcing people to come to accept the military as quote unquote necessary, and then you know, once the separatists are defeated, turning that military on its own people to form a tyrannical government. And I think at this time, like, we have to really analyze the parallel in our own societies and how the police has become so militaristic. Like, people talk about the phrase abolish the police, and then other people react like, you can't do that. Like, what about, you know, all the good things that the police do? When I hear abolish the police, I think we have to abolish the militaristic sides of the police and create a new police that is the things that we do need in our society, which, I mean, like parking tickets and stuff, right? But the parts of the police we're seeing right now going against the protests with tear gas and rubber bullets and armor and these plastic shields, like, why should we have that turned against our own people. Like, those are the kinds of things and tactics that are utilized literally in war against other governments and other people who we have come to some conflict with, which itself may be, made up in some cases by our government or their government. But to turn that type of violence on your own people is just terrifying to me.
And so you said these were tactics used in war, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that tear gas is actually considered illegal in war measures as chemical warfare. Yeah. So even going above and beyond against your own citizens, it's.
And you and I talked about this. Some of it comes down to the definition of what is quote unquote tear gas. Right. And I think there is a international, Geneva Convention description and definition, and then that differs from some of the things that they are using, which is not to excuse it. And we should examine, the same situation with how we define assault weapons, right? It's why should we have these things if they're dangerous?
Yeah, there's a difference between the layman's perspective and the specialist's perspective.
I saw a great meme that said, kind of riffing on the old champagne joke, this isn't tear gas, this is sparkling sparkling ode to tear, or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think those are really good points. And actually, and as you said that, I realized, first of all, I love that concept of escapism and allegory, and how do you balance those two? Because I think that's kind of exactly what we were getting on that episode of Superhero Ethics. We never quite said it quite that succinctly. And as you said it, I realized just how much actually Clone Wars, I think, is a very good allegory for what we're talking about right now, because one of the stories of this entire TV show, and I think of the prequels somewhat, but I think the TV show does a much better job of fleshing it out, is how an organization that was meant to, defend peace and justice in the galaxy, the Jedi, were corrupted by becoming military leaders and becoming militarized, and the Republic becoming militarized. And not that I think that George Lucas and Dave Filoni are the most prevalent commentators on the current moment, but I think that looking to the art that we have as allegory and how it applies, I think that particular idea of is very applicable today, of how the the cycle of militarization and the cycle of distrust and the cycles of violence can really lead to the kind of situation we have now, where in many parts of the country and in many neighborhoods, police are seen not as, helpers, not as people to protect you, but as an invading army. And I think, I think that's a really good point, and really a powerful way that Star Wars kind of speaks to this moment. So, well, thank you guys all. As I said, we're going to get back to these shows because I kind of now want to make
let's escape.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I kind of want to make escapism and allegory the subtitle of all of this, because I think that's what we're always going to try and give you on the show is, I think these shows are great escapism. I know I've been watching a lot of things recently. At your guys' suggestion, as well as a couple other friends, I've recently started watching Star Wars Rebels, and I'm sure some part of us will eventually talk about that on this podcast, because it's also a really interesting show, and I'm enjoying the allegory, but also loving the escapism. So let's journey back into that kind of escapism for a while, with also probably finding an allegory or two along the way. And we kind of today have three a little bit connected in chronology, but pretty independent stories. We're going to talk about them each individually. So episode 9, episode 31 overall, is Grievous Intrigue, in one of the very much dad puns that they seem to love with naming these episodes.
Oh my gosh.
Jedi Master Eth Koth is captured by General Grievous. I bet you never thought he was going to show up in this episode. While Jedi Master Adi Gala and Anakin try to rescue him. Obi-Wan plays bait to lure Grievous and capture him.
So we actually, when we went back to watch these, we skipped this one because I read the description and I was like, oh, we watched this already.
Yeah.
In our second watch through. Yeah, I was like, Grievous captures a Jedi and tortures him. Okay. But it turns out it was a different episode that I was remembering where Grievous captures a Jedi and tortures them.
Yeah, I remember reading an interview with a couple of sitcom writers from the 80s and 90s, and I can't remember who they were, but one of the points they made is they said, one of the things that's helpful to do is to figure out in your situation, what's a good joke that keeps working? And then every now and then, when you need a filler episode, you can go back to the, Bart does something that gets Homer upset, and, or whatever it is, and that's kind of how I feel about this Jedi and Grievous thing. there were very few things I thought about this episode really worth diving into. One of the first things I'll say is, in the beginning, the narrator says, despite the fact that the Republic has been winning a majority of the battles. And I was just so glad they finally acknowledged that, because it has seemed to me up till now that 90% of the episodes we see are about the Republic winning, but the narrator keeps saying, and the Separatists keep advancing, the Separatists keep winning. And so I was glad they kind of resolved that just a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. It's, there are shows that do, like, the protagonist losing well, but I don't think that Clone Wars is necessarily that, at least not right now. So, I wouldn't want to see a bunch of episodes of, like, Rex and the gang getting beat down over and over again. But yeah, keeping that acknowledgement that, like, the rebels are winning some, but also the Separatists are still a threat, keeping the conflict present.
Mm-hmm. Well, what we really need is a map. A galactic map of, like, here are the lines and how they keep changing. And, the second battle of Geonosis. Like, where is it located in that we've had multiple battles there? Like, this back and forth struggle.
The only concept I have is there's a board game called Star Wars Rebellion. Very good game. It actually feels a lot like you're playing out the movie in ways I appreciate. And it has a galactic map of where all these things go, but the map is designed for playability. And I think I have apparently Lucas put a stamp on it, and so it might have some sort of correlation to reality. But I think more than anything, I don't think they had a map while they were writing the show. I think it's the war is happening at the speed of plot. And when they need the Separatists to be winning, the Separatists are winning. And there's no sort of overall sense of,
But so there's also, like, they mention that a lot of the conflict takes place in the Outer Rim, which, like, if you just kind of think about it, it means, if this galaxy is like our galaxy, like the Milky Way, there are arms to it, like spiral arms, and the Outer Rim you would think of as kind of like out there, and then the quote-unquote core worlds are in the center of the galaxy, or closer to it.
And I think it's also different when you talk about just, like, battle lines, because, like, the universe is obviously 3 space, not just 2 space, like the globe. Not to, like, right? The 2 dimensions. The Earth is round. You know what I mean. But the universe, like, right? So there's not going to be a line. So if you had a blockade of, like, 3 ships on one side of a planet, that's not going to be very effective. Which is a thing that's always sort of bugged me about space and sci-fi movies, is that, like, we kind of just gloss over the 3-space effect.
Yeah.
To wrap our heads around it, so they're more like ships beating each other in the water than they would be, like, actually in space.
Yeah. If I were a starship captain, I would just, like, tilt my ship at an angle just to troll people.
Or, like, why are ships always coming together, like, nose to nose, right side up for each other? Like, why isn't some guy coming in at a 45-degree angle from the bottom? It's,
And I will say, I will not often praise this movie, but the one space battle that I've seen where they do that and the battle really happens in 3D space is the opening battle of Revenge of the Sith.
I do not remember that.
I watched it recently because I finished Clone Wars, the last season, which we also reviewed, and then wanted to see it again. But
gosh, I kind of want to see it again too. We also watched the last season of Clone Wars recently.
Yep.
It's a bad movie, but
I know, but this last season just makes you want to see it.
It does. It makes some things pay off more. But
I agree. Like, that space battle is pretty good, I think, from that perspective. And I also think the concept of that battle itself, because it takes place over Coruscant, the capital of the Republic, and that's another thing about war at hyperspeed, is, like, you're not really subject that much to supply lines and being cut off. Like, if you can move at hyperspeed, you can just strike at the heart of the Republic with the fleet.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Go ahead. Because normally in warfare, you have to get to this point so that then you can go 20 miles further, and then 20 miles further, and then 20 miles further. And in hyperspace, that doesn't matter. You can be, on this planet, and then hyperspace jump to somewhere completely different.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of. And then sometimes they say maybe you can't, and it's not really made clear.
Yeah, where there's, like, which routes work and which ones don't. I think, like, keeping the physics of light speed travel kind of vague is is good, because otherwise, like, if you flesh it out, then you just bring up the opportunity to punch a bunch of holes in it. But yeah, like, having all these discrete planets, the idea of, like, battle lines and battle fronts, like, you can really put the battle wherever you want it to be, because instead of having, like you said, to go through point A to get to point B, you can just, like, dip underneath point A and get straight to point B.
For real. The one other thing from this episode that I thought was interesting to discuss is, and I know you guys have told me some stuff about Grievous already that I didn't realize. Why does he hate the Jedi so much? Like, in this episode, a couple of times, he says he doesn't care for Dooku's politics. He doesn't care about the Republic. He's fighting this war to kill Jedi, and to wipe them out. Do we know why?
I know why.
Grievous kooky.
Is it revealed later in the show? And I'm just getting that?
No. It's probably in like a comic book or something. So it's actually no longer canon. It's in Legends because it was in comic books. But his planet where he's from, and I'm not going to dig up all these names, but his planet where he's from, there was like a civil war, and the Republic came in on the side of his opposition. Including some Jedi.
Got it.
So that's why, like, they came to his planet and messed up the local politics, and so now he hates Jedi because of that. Well, and actually, Dooku intentionally sabotaged Grievous's shuttle, whatever his name was before he was Grievous. His shuttle blew him up, and like that's why he became this droid cyborg. So Dooku actually set him up to be destroyed. Obviously, Grievous doesn't know this. Otherwise, he'd hate him.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like, why didn't we get that story? Like, that sounds so interesting.
You gotta buy the comic book.
Yeah. Gotta sell the other things.
I'm a big believer that if you don't, like, tell it in the story, it doesn't really count to some extent. I mean, like, it does, but, like, it's definitely a flaw that, like, here we have this character in the show who just hates the Jedi, and we have no understandable reason for it.
Yeah, just, like, a quick mention of it. But Riki, you said it wasn't canon anymore because of Legends. Do you want to, like, is that because that's because the most recent movies have sort of undone a lot of the comics?
Right. So after the original 3 movies came out, there was what was at the time called the Extended Universe, which was books, comic books, video games. And when Disney bought the Star Wars property, they wanted to write their own stories and create their own history. So they separated that and called that the Legends.
Okay.
And now everything that's happened since, so basically like anything in the 9 or I guess 11 movies and any new books and material that have come out since Disney bought it is canon and is part of kind of a different universe.
But the extended universe is still there as sort of like the mythos of the
Star Wars
universe?
I mean it's like in comics, right? Like and DC has had like Earth 1 and Earth 2 and over time they've blended all of those together.
And there's definitely elements of the extended universe that they have brought into the official canon of TV shows and movies.
Absolutely.
Even though they're officially not canon. Like the character of General Thrawn or Admiral Thrawn, who was created by like one of the first of the EU books by Timothy Zahn, which are now all considered non-canon, but that character is canon, you know, and like, as I've mentioned a couple times, and this was before the big split, but there's a number of plot lines in this TV show that do seem very deeply influenced by some of the novels about the clones and things like that.
So like to say that Grievous's origin is no longer canon, it's just not officially acknowledged in canon, as you said, Matthew. Like nowhere in the Clone Wars TV series do they mention this fact. So it could still, like, we can acknowledge it as part of his backstory, but it's just not been officially done so.
The best explanation that I heard is that what Star Wars has done is to say, we're not, if something happened in a story and we haven't contradicted it yet, then you can believe it's still true. But that we kind of now reserve the right to, that if they made a future movie or TV show that for some reason went into this history, that they could tell a completely different story about General Grievous, and it wouldn't be breaking canon because that's no longer canon. So that's the kind of thing is like, if there's a new version of it now, the new version trumps the old, but you don't have to, you know, if the old can still have some meaning for you.
Cool. Yeah. I like that.
And we'll like in the next episode of this podcast after this one, we're gonna get into Mandalorians. And of course, you have been watching the TV show Mandalorian.
I have been, yeah.
The history of that planet and race is now very confusing because of the split in Legends and canon.
It definitely is, and I would say even, and for those who have heard my most recent podcasts about the TV show Mandalorian and the TV show The Last Season of Clone Wars, both of those seem to refer to the same event without seeming to connect, and I'm curious in future seasons how if those inconsistencies get resolved in some way. But bring it back to this. So, do we have anything more to say about Grievous intrigue, or can we move on to what I think is one of the
talk about it?
What'd you say?
So did we say anything about it?
Not really.
It's a pretty blah episode. Like what you were saying earlier about if you have a trope that works, just do it. Like it seems very tropic. I don't know. I like.
It's an action-adventure episode.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of lightsaber dueling. There's a lot of droids shooting at clone troopers on the ships.
There's some children in a war room for an inexplicable reason.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. So the Jedi Council gets a call from General Grievous.
Gather round, kids!
And he's torturing Master Koth on screen, or in the hologram. And they all watch this, and then they have a discussion, and they said, "Get the younglings out of here." What were the younglings doing in this room in the first place? We're getting a call from our enemy. Gather around, younglings.
Yeah. Also, that does not seem it seems like the horse has already left the stable, and then you lock the door. But getting the younglings out after that point, it's yeah.
Yeah. It definitely has an aura to me of okay, you kids, you're living in the building of the Order of the Phoenix, but you can't listen into our meetings, which doesn't seem to make any sense. Harry Potter reference.
Riki's never seen or watched. Read?
Oh, okay. Well, given what we were learning about the author, I think that is becoming a more and more understandable position. So let's go from that to the Deserter. And I'm really curious what you all thought of this episode. This is after escaping to the planet Seleucami, Grievous searches for a ship to get off world. And here I said it's chronologically similar, but a very different story. Obi-Wan, Commander Cody, and Rex try to search for Grievous before he escapes the planet. Rex is wounded by a commando droid sniper while scouting ahead, and meets a deserter at a farm where he takes shelter. And here I think this is a very bad episode description, so I want to just say a little bit more about it, because the key kind of, I think, parts of the episode here is we meet a soldier who, he does something, you could call him deserted, or you could say, basically he got cut off, his unit was destroyed, and he failed to try and go back. He kind of just sort of went off on his own, met I think Twi'lek woman, seems to have, and has basically just been building a life and a family for himself, and him and Rex have some pretty intense conversations where Rex is saying, you're a clone. Your duty is to the Republic. You swore this oath. You have no choice. You have to come back. And the other person, whose name is Cut, is saying, no, that we never got to choose, and I'm now choosing not to, and the Republic doesn't get to, I get to be more than just the life that I was made for, that I get to choose my own life. And at the end, Rex makes a point to not turn him in any way, and he kind of says, Rex still has to go back and be who he is, but he seems to come to some understanding of why Cut is who he is, and to not in any way try to, pull him back in. What's your take on this episode?
Yeah, I understand why that's not in the description of the episode, because I think the reveal that the farmer is a clone.
Yeah, be too much spoilers.
Yeah, but I really like these kind of clone forward episodes, and I really like this episode as a fun genre mishmash. Because you also get some horror movie elements in there briefly. I like how we get to see Grievous's treatment of the droid army, and just really sort of further exploring his character and his utter disregard for the droids. They're just as much clankers to him as to the Republic.
That's a great point, yeah.
And then this idea of free will, and do the clones have free will? Do they get free will? Are they just the property of the Kaminoans? Yeah, it's really interesting.
Well, Rex, one of the lines you mentioned, Rex says, "You swore an oath to the Republic." Do the clones swear an oath, or are they just programmed with loyalty to the Republic, right?
So the way I understand it in the books is that they do actually swear an oath, but they're never given any choice not to, and they're also programmed to. Yeah. So it really raises this issue of, can you possibly call that, a consensual oath versus one given under extreme duress.
Yeah. I have a question. So, Cut and Sue, his Twi'lek wife, have kids. And, like, how does that work? Because, like, typically, clones can't have kids? And also, why would you make it so that the clones could? That's just, like, a weird side head scratch.
This may also be the only instance in Star Wars of a cross-racial couple, or cross-racial children.
Really?
Like, it's much more common in Star Trek, right? Like, half Klingon, half human, etc. I can't really think of any other example where someone is, like, half something else.
I don't think there is. And honestly, because of that, I thought they were basically his stepchildren, was the way I took it.
But they look like him.
Do they? I mean, I thought they looked very much like Twi'leks.
No, so that's what, when we first watched this episode, way back when we did our first watch through, I remember, because when they come on screen, like, they have the Twi'lek hair horn things, but they have the faces of clones, and I was like, the farmer's a clone.
Right. So the son, I think, is much less Twi'lek.
Yeah, he's more humanoid.
Yeah. Like his head growth is, like, less pronounced.
Jack, I think is his name.
Yeah. I think you're right, and also the chronology of it, frankly, makes no sense, because if the Clone Wars only lasted 3 years, and we're somewhere, you know...
Wait a minute.
Well, like, the clones have accelerated growth, so I would...
But the kid... Yeah,
like, do the kids have accelerated growth? Also, how are the kids even viable? I don't know.
Yeah,
the biology and the math don't really line up.
To me, though, putting that aside, I would say this is still... if not my favorite episode of these first couple seasons, certainly in my top 5. And it's the one that I think I remember most being excited first to really get to and dive into, because I just, you know, to me, this is really getting at, as you were saying, Sarah, it's really getting at the heart of the questions that are at the heart of the clones, you know, like, why do they have to keep fighting? And I love that we see Rex really starting to have to start questioning now and having to start wrestle with this, like, you know, he has been taught to think one way all of his life. He's been literally programmed to think this way. And his evolution in this episode, going from just, you're a deserter, you must be wrong, this doesn't fit with any understanding I have, but then being able to really listen to him and hear him out and be able to say, like, I can't do what you did, but I can respect it. I just love that character growth, and I love this exploration of the questions, because I think it gets into some deep questions about, like, is there anything at all ethical about the clones being basically bred to fight a war that they never get to have any choice in?
No.
Well, Rex himself, by the end of the episode, is breaking his oath, right? By not reporting Cut.
Well, he might just forget it. You know, he's had quite an ordeal.
That's a very human response. But like, if he actually believes in this oath and serving a republic, like, he has to follow protocol, and he doesn't.
Yeah, but I think he sees, so especially, okay, so Grievous crash lands there. There's also a droid freighter, I don't know what it is, a ship containing a bunch of battle droids also crash lands on the farm, and the kids find it and push a button and activate all the droids, and then they run back into the house, and this is where the zombie horror movie aspect comes in.
Oh yeah,
where
coming through the window,
it's like a field at night, and there's these, like, creepy slow moving guys walking around. So Cut sends Rex with his wife and kids upstairs, and he's like, I need you to be the last line of defense, and Rex wants to go and fight with him, but Cut, I think, rightly points out, one of your arms doesn't work right now, just go hang out. And then I think Rex, watching Cut so fiercely defend his family and still, like, fight against these battle droids, he sees that he's not a coward. He just has like, different loyalties, and I think that helps Rex reconcile this not turning him over.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it's interesting to hear about the what you said about the mixing of the tropes, because I think this is sometimes in horror movies, but also in other movies. But, like, one definite trope is, like, the younger kind of idealistic, you know, armed soldier who's like, oh yeah, we got to do it, rah rah for the troops, let's go fight this battle, and the kind of grizzled old veteran who's either left or just as deeply cynical about it, having to work together in the fight, which is another sort of trope I thought they were playing on. But yeah, I think that's right, that Rex has to see that, because again, his programming is, and I don't, sort of I mean that technically, but mostly just the way he's been taught is, you fight for the Republic or you're a coward. And so getting to see someone say, like, no, I'm not a coward, I fight for what I protect, I just don't think the Republic is, and the clones is something worth fighting for, is such an interesting twist on that.
Yeah, definitely. Like, he seems to think of deserters like literally you ran away from battle, where, I mean, he kind of did in a way, but the rest of his troop was killed, and he just didn't go back to the Republic. Like, they've been abandoned on this planet. The rest of his company killed by droids, and so he just, like, decided to not go back instead of, like, actually deserting, which I think also helps Rex be more accepting of Cut.
Right. I also think it's interesting, and a kind of interesting parallel here. You know, as we've talked about before, one of the overarching themes of all of Star Wars, but especially the Clone Wars, is the idea that the Jedi are not supposed to have attachments, and that those attachments can, you know, pull you away from your mission, and that to some extent that happens with Anakin. Although in part that's because the whole idea of no attachment is kind of stupid. And I like that we're kind of seeing that with Rex as well here, because to some extent I think the clones are supposed to be just, you know, their only attachment is supposed to be to each other. They're not supposed to have, like, the wife and kids at home to go fight and protect. And so I think it's subtle, but I think part of what we're also supposed to be seeing here is Rex kind of having a, like, oh, this is the life that I could have that I'm probably never going to have because of where I am and who I am.
Instead, he gets a different life. Yeah. We'll get to that someday.
Yeah, definitely. I did a couple other things. I like that you commented on Grievous. It's almost just, like, comedically bad at this point, where, you know, like, he pushes them till their batteries are draining, and that, like, there's one thing about, like, push humans till their reserves are exhausted, and it's a really stupid thing to do, but you can sort of claim, like, their willpower can keep pushing them forward. Like, how do you blame someone for their battery being dead?
It's so... And just watching them slowly shut down while, like, attempting to give directions to Grievous.
The one that complains, he literally just cuts in half with his lightsaber.
Yeah.
Right.
And I know, like, we're used to this, you know, the Empire, Darth Vader killing Admiral Ozzel, and there's other examples of this. But most of those examples were, I would say, punishing incompetence, right?
Right.
And so there's at least this idea that you are maybe improving your military by getting rid of the incompetent leaders. But here, Grievous just seems abusive.
Yeah.
And, like, kind of, like, pointlessly so.
He's angry, right? He's just pissed off, and he's going to cut droids in half, because he doesn't see them as, in any way, shape, or form, not even his equals, but, like, his army, really. They're just tools for him to use to get back at the Jedi. And this tool isn't working right, so he's going to smash it. Like when your TV's broken and you want to kick it.
Yeah, I think it's very true. Two of the last things I want to comment on. One was Rex. I think we've kind of gone into this before, but I did think it's interesting that Rex says that part of why he has to fight is because he doesn't want, people, and including Cut's children, to, quote, live under evil if the Separatists win.
Yeah.
Why?
That's like propaganda.
The Separatists want to go off and do their own thing. We have no evidence. Like, as awful as they're going to be in their own world, we have no evidence that they want to conquer the Republic by any means.
Mostly, I feel like if you live under the Separatists, you're just probably going to get taxed a lot more. They seem to be about money and greed for the most part.
I mean, but they have droid soldiers. They don't even need to, like, impress you into the fighting.
But there's no, at least in the TV show and the movies, there's no real clear concept of what the Separatist government is and how it acts towards its own people. So the only thing we can say that they're evil is, like, we as outside observers know that they are controlled by Dooku, a Sith, and and he has evil intentions. But then, same with Palpatine, right? So I think it's mostly just we know Dooku is quote unquote evil, so they're evil.
Well, the Separatist Alliance is quite literally a plot device, right? Like, Sidious made them up, essentially, so that he could put himself in power, right? So, like, the fact that the Separatists don't really have a clear agenda kind of, like, makes sense in universe, because they're just this sort of ad hoc, like, we want to fight, I guess.
Right. I mean, the way I've always understood it, and I think here's some of the novels, including some of the ones that are written more recently, but they may all be EU, they do a better job explaining this, and at least they kind of touch on this somewhat with characters like Clovis in the show. But it's the idea that there are some very legitimate grievances that people in the separatist worlds had about the Republic and about the corruption and things like that. Yeah. But that you have someone who basically like takes all of that anger and upsetness and manipulates it into doing like horrible, terrible things that are not really connected to it. And I feel like we get much more of the what they get manipulated into and nowhere near enough of the legitimate real protest.
Yeah, well, and in the next season with the Mandalorians, we see why people might be intrigued by the Separatists and their agenda. Right. But, yeah.
Well, and it's why I will continue harping that I think the entire arc of the story, both the second and third movie, but also the show, would have been so much better if Dooku never realized he was being manipulated by Sidious. Like, Dooku hadn't turned... And maybe, like, by season 6, he turns all the way to the dark side. But what if, like, this entire time, Dooku honestly believes he is doing what's right for his people and other worlds, and he's talking a lot with this guy, you know, who's sort of whispering in his ear somewhat, and only by, like, season 6 does he fully turn to the dark side, you know, and realize what's been happening. Like...
Yeah, that's interesting. I always think, okay, so this is a little bit of a tangent, but in my opinion, the most evil Disney villain of all time is Judge Claude Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, because he thinks he's doing the right thing the whole time. Despite being incredibly, incredibly evil. I'm not sure if you're, like, familiar with Hunchback of Notre Dame, but...
I haven't actually seen it.
Alright, it's based on the Victor Hugo novel, but it's a kiddification of it. But essentially, Claude Frollo works for the church. He's trying to, like, rid the city of evil. He takes Quasimodo, the hunchback, into his care, and he's like, I'm protecting you and I'm loving you, but he walks away in the bell tower. Anyway, he's trying to rid the city of, like, Roma people, because they're, like, all evil and bad. And they're just, like... living their lives, and Esmeralda is one of them, and he's like, if you marry me, then everyone's fine, but like otherwise you have to burn horribly. Yeah, it's a show. We should watch it. Disney Plus, man. Anyway, he honestly believes he's doing like the right godly thing the whole time, but he ends up like burning Paris down, trying to hunt for Esmeralda. He locks Quasimodo up in this bell tower in Notre Dame, thinking that he's protecting him, but really he's just like hiding him away from the world. Yeah, but he's like thinks that he's like a good, godly man doing the right thing. And it's just not, which is terrifying.
Well, and Riki, you and I just did that whole episode on superhero ethics about villains, and I'm curious if you'd agree with this, but yeah, I think this is a great example of this, of where one of the points that I think you made so well is that the best villains are those ones that, as Sarah was saying, that we agree with, and that Dooku to me would be so much more powerful if he was that, if he was a villain who really thought he was the hero. And we just lose that entirely in this.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of Star Wars, the prequels, when I watched them, I think one of the reasons they upset me so much is that I think it could have been a really, really interesting story if you had the dark side believing they were doing the right thing. Like, they were opposing the Jedi because the Jedi were too powerful.
Right.
And like they believe this is honestly in the best interest of the people, and that's why they're doing this. Instead, it's like secretly this plot of this old dude who's been like working his way through this for 30 some years, which just feels a little flat. I think it's it's more interesting. Sorry, the cat's eating food right behind us. That's what that crunching noise is.
That's fine.
But it's I think it's more interesting when internally they think they're doing the right thing. We get this like broader perspective.
We get that with Anakin.
Yeah, but like,
and we get that a lot more with Anakin in this TV series, as opposed to the I just want to save my supposedly dying wife.
Right. Yeah. Well, and even if it wasn't Dooku, I think it's why characters like Clovis, and we do meet some more as the show goes on, become some of my most the ones I find most interesting is because I do think we meet separatist leaders who don't realize that they're being run by the Sith and who do believe in the cause beyond just, haha, we're going to make a buck and rub our hands like greedy, either Asian or Jewish stereotypes of rich capitalists. But I wish we got a lot more of those.
Yeah, it's not all just like Techno Union or the banking clan. It's like legit just normal people. Yeah.
And we do get more of that as the show goes on. I'm glad we get that here. The last thing I'll say in this episode is, and I was going to talk about the TV show Avatar: The Last Airbender, but I know you guys haven't seen that, so I won't say anything spoilery there. But I'm curious what you think of the quote that starts this episode. It's the quest for honor that makes someone honorable.
Yeah, when that flashed on screen, I like laughed and I said, it's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions, except like the opposite. Right? Like it seems like the opposite idiom. I don't think it's the quest for honor that makes someone honorable. It's like doing honorable things that make someone honorable, right?
What does that even mean? The quest for honor.
Quest for honor. It seems like if you try, then you're fine.
Yeah. Cause I think what it gets to me is it's that same idea of like, do you care about doing good things or do you care about looking good? Mm-hmm. And I feel like having honor is a nice byproduct of doing good things and like being an honorable person. But if you go out and try to be like, I am going to try and do the honorable thing, your motivations are completely whacked, and like you're almost never gonna. There's a lot of great TV shows and movies I think that have done an interesting job of showing like how lost a person can get when they. It's kind of an example of that, how you can become the villain, because you're trying to fight to have honor without actually having really thought about what does that mean.
Yeah, no, totally. I think you're spot on, right? Like Podfollow again, but also like in Peter Pan, Captain Hook is like in the book extraordinarily concerned with honor and good form. Doing the honorable thing and the correct thing. Yeah.
That's a great pull. I hadn't realized that.
Bringing in all the in the movie, he's more just like afraid of a crocodile and running around. But in the book, he's constantly talking about good form and having good form.
Nice.
What even is his motivation?
Captain Hook?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he does.
Is it like a treasure?
No, sort of. So in the book, it's interesting. Neverland is sort of this like circular. The pirates chase the native tribes chase the Lost Boys chase the pirates. And they just sort of go on like that forever.
Oh, okay. Great.
Yeah.
So I will say on that note, though, at least in the Disney version, Captain Hook does quite literally twirl his mustache.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's where we actually get the expression from, but I think part of that may answer your question as well.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
So let's move on to the last episode. Lightsaber lost. When Ahsoka's lightsaber is stolen by a pickpocket, she gets help from the seemingly feeble elder Jedi Tera Sunube as she tracks down the thief. What's your take on this, Sarah? I think you kind of started to indicate that.
Did I like show my hand there? Yeah, it's so bad.
This episode's great.
I love it so much. No, I thoroughly dislike Master Sunube, because he just like I get the point that they're trying to make, which is like Ahsoka's too hot-headed. I need to like slow down and take a look at things. But Sunube just has this like condescending. I'm old and therefore know so much more than you.
Right.
Like smug smirk the whole time. So yeah, someone pickpockets Ahsoka's lightsaber. Which, first of all, what?
It's so bad. It's
right?
Such a bad
and,
plot
like,
device.
she doesn't want to tell Anakin that this is what's happened because he'd be very upset. So she goes to the library and talks to Mr. Jocasta, and she puts Ahsoka in touch with Sunube, who's all like, "Oh my, well, I haven't been on a mission in 80 years. Let's go." And they go and find a gangster who's been killed, and then his like sobbing girlfriend, and Sunube's like sitting there and is like, "Oh, but you don't." Like he's just a smug, condescending dick.
He's Columbo.
I've never seen Columbo, but
that's so well put.
He keeps insinuating, and there's one point where so constantly Ahsoka's like, come on, you have to hurry up. And he's like, no, it is you who must slow down. And there's one point where he's driving a car on the space highway and just going extraordinarily slow. And other like speeders are zipping around him and honking. And Ahsoka's like, you have to hurry. And he's like, patience. And it's like, no, like, for our safety in the traffic lane, you have to match the speed of traffic, old man. Like, but also, like, nobody... Okay, so going back to the killed mobster and his girlfriend, nobody asked, like, the girlfriend, why did you kill your mobster boyfriend? So she poisons him, and she's trying to play it off like a group of assassins came in and killed him. And Sunube realizes that that's not what's up, but doesn't ask, like, what motivated you to kill this guy? This mobster? Was he, like, really abusive to you, and that's why you're trying to kill him so you can escape? He's just like, I know you did it.
Yeah.
Wait, it's not to steal the lightsaber?
Oh, frig, maybe. There we go. I missed that. I didn't think so. I thought the lightsaber was tangential to that.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
I felt like everything was about the lightsaber.
It definitely felt to me like the point of this episode was we want to have Ahsoka go off with a different Jedi, to give her these wise life lessons and to highlight that Anakin is a terrible mentor, which I'll get to more about that in a second. And then they were like, okay, so let's make up a MacGuffin of a plot to drive that story along, and they spent precisely 30 seconds plotting out the logic of that storyline, and then went, okay, cool, we're done, let's go. And yeah. I think I liked parts of this episode more than you did. I did find him condescending, but also kind of charming. And I liked
him charming too. I do not like him at all.
I mean, he's a male figure being incredibly condescending towards a woman, and I think it's entirely possible that I'm missing part of that, and that's my own blind spot there. So I appreciate you kind of pushing on that. I think I also liked, though, to me, what more than anything, what this highlights is, just as I was kind of joking about, just how bad of a mentor Anakin is, because it seems like so much of what he's saying is like, wait, why have you not been trained to do this? Why have you not been trained to do that? And part of me is really frustrated that he keeps taking it out on her instead of saying, like, oh, you poor youngling, you've been so badly taught. Let's get Anakin off of training you. That seems like, because especially from the very beginning, the fact that she, when she loses her lightsaber, her first response is to lie to Anakin about it. We've seen a couple of other examples of Padawans with their mentors. Could you ever imagine any of those other Padawans lying to their mentors about it like this?
Yeah, definitely not. Some spoilery Padawan mentor stuff that I don't want to get into.
Oh, yeah, fair.
But yeah, it's a much more friendly relationship that Ahsoka and Anakin seem to have. Like, they seem to be just like buddies, and she's totally okay with mouthing off to him, which I kind of like. And I mean, like, right, he calls her Snips because she's snippy, I guess. But yeah, it also seems like weirdly out of character for Ahsoka to not tell Anakin that this happened.
Right.
Like,
it seems out of order for the Jedi Order to not have protocols on lost lightsabers. Like,
right.
At my workplace, we have scan badges to get into the building, and if you lose your scan badge, you have to report it immediately, because then someone, they have to turn that barcode off.
Yeah.
So that someone doesn't get in the building. And I feel like the Jedi Order would be like, if you lose your lightsaber, report it immediately, because it's a dangerous freaking weapon.
Yeah.
Right.
And at one point in the episode, Master Sunube is like, I sense how worried you are, because, like, you think any murder that happens with this weapon is going to be on you.
You're right.
Yeah, and he's like, I'll let you mull that over. And then just, like, walks off, and it's just like, what? But also, like, the fact that she goes and tells Jocasta, and she doesn't, like, Jocasta's just like, oh, well, what a pickle you've gotten yourself into. Like, there totally should be some sort of protocol for dealing with a pickpocket has stolen my lightsaber.
Yeah. Perhaps maybe locking your lightsaber more closely onto your belt, perhaps? Or
the fact it wasn't even like they tricked her. It was just somebody brushed by her in a crowd and grabbed it off of her, which makes no sense.
No, and also, like, she watches him getting away.
Yeah.
We've seen her chase people across, like, entire planets before.
Or just, use the Force to get your lightsaber back.
That fish guy just disappears in the crowd.
Yeah. Ugh. It's so plot devicey, which I think is one of the reasons why I hate it. Then there's condescending old man, which, like, I might be reading too much into it, but yeah, don't like that dude. And just, like, he just seems like a worse Yoda in so many ways.
Oh, now I'm imagining this episode with Yoda.
This episode with Yoda, I think I would like it. Because I don't think Yoda would be as much of a, like, jerk.
Yeah. I think he'd be more gentle and more understanding.
Yeah, and, like, still teaching the lesson of, like Ahsoka's gonna figure it out on her own, and, like, Yoda would guide her to that point, but not be as much of a jerk about it. Not be as condescending about it.
Fill out the paperwork, you must. It's like 30 minutes of that.
I mean, what would probably happen, honestly, is he'd be just as condescending, but he'd be much cuter about it, so he wouldn't mind as much. Yeah. I didn't have...
charming kind of condescending? I don't even know.
Yeah. I don't really have much else to say about the episode. And it's also, I think, frustrating, because, again, like, the criminal underworld of Coruscant and how disconnected the Jedi are from all of that. That sounds like such a fascinating idea to explore. And, like, there's one moment that I actually really liked, which is when they go down there, it's very clear Ahsoka is just, you know, it's like taking a rich, privileged white kid to a poor people of color neighborhood for the first time. You know, like, she acts like she just has no understanding of what's happening here. And there's a moment in particular where they walk by a sick man who's, like, on a bench, clearly being very sick, and Ahsoka looks at him, like, with disgust.
Yeah. And
that just seemed like such a non-Jedi moment of, like, you're supposed to be, first of all, trying to heal these people if you can, but not certainly having compassion, not like, ugh, that's disgusting.
Gross, poor people, yeah.
No, it's disgust for the system that has led to this. Yeah, okay, never mind.
And, like, it's just, she's so out of touch. Like, they have a lead in the criminal underworld, and of, like, yeah, I sold it to this gangster, or, like, she goes to, no, the first thing they do is she goes to, like,
they go to a restaurant.
Yeah, like random shop A, and is like, hello, I'm looking to buy a lightsaber, please. And, like, the guy is like, yeah, come on back, I can tell you about it, sure. Which is just, like, okay. And then, like, she plays her hand really quickly and is like, that's my lightsaber. I'm a Jedi. Give me my lightsaber back. And the two criminals are just like, oh, yeah, sorry. We'll tell you where to go to find it. Go find your lightsaber. Bye. Which just seems so backward and just, like, weird. Like, why wouldn't they just tell her, like, screw off, Jedi? Right? Like, you're a Jedi. We're not talking to you.
No, I think that makes sense. I think it speaks to how, I don't know if it's respect is the right word, feared the Jedi are.
But they didn't even seem afraid of her. They were just kind of like, oh, you're a Jedi? Okay, we'll tell you. I don't know. It was so weird. It was super weird. I was fully expecting, like... So, Sinube is, like, standing behind her the whole time, just, like, smugging it up.
Right.
And doesn't jump in and be like, listen, Ahsoka, we need to play this cool, and, like, try and, like, slowly get this information out of them. He's just, like, hanging out, and just like, you should tell us where it is.
Yeah, for real. All right.
Oh, and there's another part. Sorry,
no, go for it.
Angry. Where this is near the end of the episode. One of the girls who had helped kill the gangster boyfriend, who has Ahsoka's lightsaber, has kidnapped two people on a train and is holding them hostage. And Ahsoka is like, okay, I'll make you a deal. I'm, like, way more valuable. We'll just switch. I'll be the hostage. You let those two people go. And the criminal lady, who looks like Sally from Nightmare Before Christmas, is like, no, if I do that, you'll just use some Jedi mind trick on me. Which is like, why isn't Ahsoka just using a Jedi mind trick on her right now? Like...
So I think we've talked about this before and how it's true in a lot of shows, Star Trek especially, but that one of the problems with giving your main characters like very good powers, either of technology or magic or whatever, is that you have to figure out ways to turn off those powers so that the plot can happen, because a lot of times it would just be too easy. And that's why in Star Trek there's always some dilithium mumbo jumbo thing breaking that means they can't deal, that they create the plot situation they want to create.
Yeah, or like,
and I just feel like Star Wars doesn't even bother to do that. They just sort of forget that their people have the power to do these things all the time.
And like, honestly, I had forgotten. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, she's taken hostages. Ahsoka, why don't you Jedi mind trick her? Until they like explicitly point out the Jedi mind trick is a thing. And I'm just like, well, yeah. Why don't you just do that right now?
Yeah, she's one of like the many races that you can't do that to. Because that also just comes up.
Yeah,
right?
And that's the thing. That's a Star Trek thing too, right? Like, this is one of the races that Troy can't read the emotions of.
Yeah, but when it's convenient. One of the planets that the transporter can't work on when we want our heroes caught. Anyway,
this was a big problem with the X-Files, because the X-Files started like right around when cell phones became a thing. So they always had to have like, oh no, like Scully's cell phone is like out of range or whatever. Like, no, I can't get a hold of her.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's just like every modern like horror movie now has to find a way to, how do you get rid of the cell phones? Yeah.
Right, because the idea of being like isolated the way that the average horror movie is, that the phone lines are cut off, doesn't make any sense in the cell phone world. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because I sometimes will have this thing where I'll go back and watch, like, I love 80s movies, especially like the teen rom-coms and the John Waters movies and stuff like that. Molly Ringwald and the Brat Pack and all them. But it's funny because every now and then I'll watch one and be like, wait, why don't they just Right, no cell phones. Like, there's so many movies where like the entire plot is based on a miscommunication that like one text message could have solved and erased the entire movie.
Yeah, well, even like with Stranger Things, right? Like the choice of setting that in the 80s, I think was in a way to get around, like, the kids could just text each other and then this problem is solved a lot faster. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. Anyway, so yeah, these 3 episodes I think is kind of really emblematic of what we get in the early seasons of Clone Wars, because we have one, I think, really brilliant, well-played episode that still has 1 or 2 plot points of where these kids come from, but still a very good episode. One just ridiculously dumb episode, and then one episode that has a lot of problems and introduces some interesting story beats, but also just doesn't do very well. And I'm glad we're going through these together, because we can talk about the things that I really like and the things that I think are really worth talking about, and that I think really, to me, episodes like The Deserter really flesh out the whole Star Wars story and the Star Wars universe. Mm-hmm. And then we can also talk about the really dumb episodes like the Grievous intrigue.
Oh my gosh.
Which we just didn't. I was just going to say, to anyone who came here like looking for information about that episode,
deep dive,
there was a lot of lightsaber fighting.
Yeah.
There's
That's
a lot of
pretty much all the episode was.
Yeah.
Lightsaber fighting, some kids being traumatized.
Which again, kind of, I think that at some point they make the point that you have to be force sensitive to really truly understand how a lightsaber works, which doesn't make General Grievous make any sense whatsoever.
What? But then it also doesn't make any sense in Lightsaber Lost, because everybody who's grabbed Ahsoka's lightsaber is just like turning it on and like cutting their hands off.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can use it, but to be like actually a skilled fighter in it.
Good at it? Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, like Han Solo can cut open a tauntaun with it, so.
And I thought they smelled bad on the outside.
Exactly. All right, any last comments before we wrap up?
Okay, one about the Deserter. I enjoyed Grievous's go-go gadget arm.
Yes, that was a fun little moment.
Grievous just, like, in general, is terrifying yet delightful.
Yeah, I think it's well put.
I enjoy every moment where he gets on all 4s, 6s, and does like his
crawl.
Yeah.
I feel like you could make a lot of
exorcist
parallels
walk
with Grievous and as I've done with Cookie Monster, but also with Inspector Gadget. Right? They have this like they've been replaced with machinery.
Yeah, I like both of those connections.
Yeah. All right, cool.
And let me actually ask you this: in the comics, I'm very interested in how we get to the technology that makes Darth Vader Darth Vader. Is there, in the comics, any indication that part of the creation of General Grievous is about testing out this capacity to take a very badly injured person and sort of rebuild them as a $6 million man, half human, half cyborg, or half person, half cyborg kind of thing that eventually leads to the Darth Vader tech? Or is that connection never made in the comics?
They're very different, though.
Yeah, but the general concept, I guess, is similar.
Grievous is literally just like a brain and a heart. It's like his biological components.
But you can see that. I mean, that can be part of the thing. Is like I could even imagine it being a story where like it was like, okay, so we tried that with this part of Grievous, it didn't work. We're now using something fairly different. Oh, hey, Vader, we still have most of his body, if not some limbs. Can we do it differently there?
Well, so Grievous was originally not force sensitive, right? So I would think you would have to have some kind of limit on how much you could replace a living being before they lose the connection to the force.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Wait, Grievous wasn't force sensitive before he was Grievous, but now he is?
No, he's not.
No, he's not. He's just.
So then why is he using lightsabers?
That was my whole point.
Because he has like robot reflexes.
I see.
Right. Which then makes you wonder why they don't just, make all the droids able to be really good with the light sword things they fight with. But there you go. No, and you're right. Because also I'm remembering that the reason why Vader Anakin dies at the end of Jedi is that apparently that his connection to Palpatine, who is not killed at the Battle of Yavin. Apparently, I've been saying that wrong, so I will be more appropriate.
I told you guys it's not wrong because it's a fictional planet.
It's just a New York accent. Yeah, but I did at some point. I think I'd said Yavin. It becomes Yawin in my head that I just started thinking it was Yawin. But anyway, the point being, I think it's supposed to be some kind of forced connection between Palpatine and Vader that is helping to keep him alive in the cybernetic of it all. But it may be two totally different things. That would make sense too.
In Legends, the Emperor Palpatine is basically holding the entire Imperial Navy together.
Right. Yeah. That his death is why the rest of the fleet gets wiped out soon after. Yeah. Timothy Zahn does a great job of that. All right. Anyway, so we will keep discussing all this. Keep diving into Legends canon. Keep diving into all the other stuff. Fans, what is your take? Especially the Deserter. We'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on how this episode made you think about the clones and the clones' role in the war and the Jedi's role in the war. We talked at the beginning about Black Lives Matter and this current moment in history and how it connects to Star Wars. We'd again love to hear your thoughts there. We'll say that we'll ask that that this is obviously an area where we're trying to be very just don't be a racist dick. That's the easiest thing I'm going to say. I'm going to try and say it, but just all comments are welcome, but racism, please be careful of that.
I want to hear people's thoughts on Grievous intrigue.
Yes,
if you are a fan of this episode, we certainly did not do it justice. Tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm definitely down with that. Tell us about that. Tell us about Lightsaber Lost. Tell us about how actually Ahsoka and Sunube could be a great team, and we should get rid of Anakin, or whatever your thoughts are. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and email. All the links to that are in the show notes. Please also remember that Star Wars Universe podcast is a part of the Stranded Panda podcast network. There's a lot of great other podcasts out there. If you like the way we deep dive into Star Wars, you can find podcasts that do similar deep dives into everything from the Marvel universe to the DC universe to the Star Trek universe to the Orville universe, if that's your bag. The Bingers Assemble, which talked about Altered Carbon and also talked about the X-Men movies. Any kind of fandom that you're part of, we probably got some way for you to listen to people talking with way too much self-importance and at way too much time about it, because that's what we do, and that's fun. So I'm having myself, Riki and Sarah, thank you guys all so much. Thank you to our fans for listening. Have a great day.